Thanks for listening to Live Forever Young Radio. Chances are, no matter what your age, you've heard the phrase, okay boomer, before. But what is the phrase really saying about us as humans and our need to be better? Today on the show, Bob and Raleigh talk about the okay boomer phenomenon. They share the history of the phrase from its beginning on social media to its current use in mainstream culture. They also analyze the driving factors behind what causes people to create negative stereotypes and what you can do to get past the negative and begin to listen and observe others without judgment. So inform yourself for your health and live forever young.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Live Forever Young Radio. I'm Bob Gilpatrick. I'm here with Raleigh Culp. Hello,
Hey, Bob.
Raleigh.
How's it going, dude?
How are you today?
I'm doing good, man.
Good.
I can't complain. I'm here, I'm with you, and whenever I'm with you, it's a good time.
Thank you. Likewise. And, Raleigh, today we're going to talk about this weird thing called okay boomer.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody's heard about it. Okay boomer, right?
So I am a baby boomer. I was born in 1956.
Yes,
right?
you are.
And boomers were born starting in 1946 up through 64. So I'm kind of like right in the middle of the baby boomers.
You're smack dab in there,
Okay.
so you are the boomer.
I'm now 65 years old, so that I'm right in the middle of the baby boomers. And what this means is that there was this group of people, a large group of people were born right after World War II.
Right.
When all the soldiers came back.
They came
So you
home.
had this boom
Of babies.
births.
Right.
Of babies.
You seen
right?
the picture of the sailor kissing the lady? That's just one.
That's right. There were about 76 million people born during that time.
Right.
Okay. And so you, on the other hand, are not a baby boomer. You're not that old.
I was born in 1982, so I am a millennial. I am actually right after the millennials. So the millennials are supposed to be from 81 through to 94. Okay, so I'm like 1 year after that, 1 year removed, or 2 years removed from what would be the prior generation, which is Gen X. Gen X is from 65 to 79.
Yeah. And so there's this general readiness to believe by each cohort, right? Now, this is when I say general, it's because it's a generalization.
Correct.
And so you have this kind of like a rift where the boomers look at people that are younger and they're like kids these days,
Right.
Even though they're full-grown adults, and they have these various generalizations they have about them. And then the kids who for a long, long time were silent about this devaluing of them, came back all of a sudden back in 2009 with okay boomer.
Yes.
And it's not like okay boomer, it's okay boomer.
Yeah, like, okay, right.
Boomer,
yeah.
like you're so old, you're so out of touch, you don't know what's going on, but don't worry, you're okay, old man,
Right.
old woman. Okay, boomer.
Right. And that actually is something that was, like Bob had said, it's kind of something that had, so the younger generations weren't, not talking back, that's what they were taught. But then like around 2009 on Reddit, the first use of the phrase okay boomer occurred. And it kind of stayed dormant, right? They didn't use a lot. But then, like Bob said, we kind of got tired of hearing being called these kids these days, irresponsible. So we started firing back with okay boomer. And it got popular around 2019 on TikTok. Was one of the biggest things that that made it big. And it was like a rebuttal to ranting boomers, the ones that are saying,
ranting about kids
stay
these
off
days.
my lawn, you dang kids. So that's where it came from.
Kind of where it came from. But it's now become part of mainstream media, too. It's not just TikTok. I was watching ESPN the other day, and there was a commentator there, and they asked him a question about what he thought about this decision that a particular coach had made.
Right.
Or a decision and something that he said. And his response was, that was a real boomer type of thing that he said.
Right.
And what it meant was that old man coach is out of touch. And so it's now mainstream, ESPN is mainstream media. And you have one of their well-known commentators, I won't mention his name, saying that was a real boomer thing to say.
Yeah,
right?
and I've also heard it on different news media outlets too, when they're talking about not just the phenomenon of okay boomer, but when they're talking to maybe an older pundit who's giving their opinion, and they'll say, well, okay, boomer, and then they'll move on.
And move on.
It's like,
Yeah. So now these are generalizations, of course, because if you were to ask a person who was a millennial, right, what do you think of Steve Jobs?
oh, he's a cool guy.
Steve Jobs created Apple computers.
He's a boomer.
And the iPhone, and he's a boomer.
Right.
And you can go on and on and on with people who are boomers. And you notice, Raleigh, I said people who are millennials and people who are boomers.
Correct.
Okay? Because we're all people first, and then we have various characteristics, sometimes based on race or religion or based on our age. We have characteristics, right? And so, but we always want to use the phrase people who are.
Correct.
Because it changes the narrative, it changes the psychology.
Yeah, like listen to the difference. People who are older or old people.
Right.
I mean, it's not about what you say, it's how you say it. You know what I mean?
Or, okay, boomer.
Right, same thing.
What are the driving factors behind this, right?
Right.
Where do people get off creating this type of negativity, right?
Yeah, like why is it necessary to somebody? Why?
And so here's the thing, Raleigh. People create sets of beliefs and sets of values, right? And they consider themselves to be right, and in some cases, superior.
Above.
Okay? Right. And so that's just kind of a way that people develop their self-esteem. And it's very typical in children as they get older, and teenagers will call other kids names based on their height, their weight, whether they're smart or not so smart, and they'll make fun of each other. And what it's doing for their self-esteem is, if I make you bad, that therefore I can be good. And worse yet, I can't be good
Unless you're bad.
Unless you're bad. It's called a comparative observation.
Now, is that something that maybe could have come from like trying to survive back in the day, and maybe looking at things that like that person's not working at, like say caveman times, right? Like that person's not working as hard. They're not as good as me, and I'm out there working. Or is it just you think something?
It's more territorial. So there's some real territorial neurotransmitters, right?
Okay.
Because people back in the caveman days had either a territory or they were wandering, but they needed to have a certain space that was theirs where they could hunt and gather. And if neighboring tribes infringed on their area, people would become very, very territorial. Okay. And so it helped when you were territorial. If you devalued the people who were trying to come into your territory, because if you were to make them less than you, it was okay to injure or kill them.
Right, and keep them off your territory.
Right. And you even see
Justification.
that. You even see that in more modern day wars where people would devalue the enemy with derogatory phrases, and I won't mention any, but people know what we're talking about. Right. And so this type of strategy of making oneself feel better with comparative observations is very well understood now with the onset of the psychology of NLP, right?
Okay.
The whole discipline of NLP.
You know what NLP is neuro-linguistics programming, right?
Neuro-linguistic programming.
Okay, yeah, we just didn't say
And
it.
neuro-linguistic programming was something that was pioneered in 1978 as under that name, when there were two scientists, Doctors Bandler and Grinder, and they were studying the world's best psychologists. So, for example, Milton Erickson was so famous that he was on the cover of Time magazine and Life magazine in the same year. And he was considered this magical therapist who had these very, very high-level linguistic skills that were used for helping people get better from mental illnesses. And then there were others too. Virginia Satir, who was the founder of modern-day group therapy. Fritz Perls, another famous psychologist. And so Bandler and Grinder studied them. And in most cases, the famous psychologists weren't 100% aware of what they were doing. It came naturally to them. And so Bandler and Grinder set about to digitize it and analyze it so it could be taught to other people.
Okay.
And they wrote a book when they were finished with their research called The Structure of Magic. And that was the first book about neurolinguistic programming. And then they began teaching psychologists what they had learned, and it blossomed into an entire industry in the field of psychology called NLP. And quite often, people who study NLP or become certified in NLP study Ericksonian hypnosis at the same time. And it's similar but two different things, but they go very, very well together since a lot of the NLP came from the work of Milton Erickson.
Okay.
And so what we know from those studies is that people have filters in their mind, right? And they tend to do three things with pieces of information that come at them. One is they'll delete, two is they'll distort, and three is they will generalize.
So deleting, that sounds like you just don't remember it. Whatever the situation was, you decide, I don't even want to think about it.
If it doesn't fit, you don't want to think about it. So people have these sets of beliefs that they've created about themselves and about life in general and about other people. And if something comes at them that doesn't fit that narrative, they ignore it.
Delete.
That's deletion. Okay. Now, distorting means that they blow it out of proportion, right?
I'm good at that.
That was terrible. That was awful, right?
Yes.
And there was another psychologist that coined the phrase awfulizing.
Yes, we've talked about that before.
And so awfulizing,
Don't be an awfulizer.
Yeah, awfulizing is simply when an event happens and someone perceives it to be awful.
Right.
Right. And because you've perceived it to be awful, changes your neurochemistry, changes the way your heart beats, closes your mind down to possibilities. Right. And so it's, distortion is definitely something that causes a lot of problems.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And then the third being generalization fits with what we're talking about here, okay, boomer, because if you are saying okay, boomer, you're generalizing in a sense that all boomers are like that.
And that's like 20 years worth of people.
And the same if you say kids these days, you're referring to all kids, when very clearly not all kids are behaving in the way that millennials are generalized and characterized.
A great example is the young girl who did the speech at the inauguration.
Yes.
I can't think of her name right now, so forgive me for that. But that very young wrote a beautiful speech, and everybody, oh, she's amazing. Well, yeah, she's a millennial. She's a kid these days. Same, like we were talking about with like the guy who owns Virgin. The guy just went up into space.
Richard Branson.
Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos. These guys are boomers, and they're up in space.
Right.
So
exactly. So
they're
they're not
doesn't
out of
always
touch.
fit.
They're still leading the way.
Right. This generalization is not always a fit, and most times it's not true.
Right. And so generalization is what leads to what's called stereotypes.
Yes.
So
well, we all know those.
You say, okay, boomer, all boomers are out of touch. That's a stereotype, right? And a stereotype is this kind of, generalization, and it can very unfortunately be used to harm large groups of people, right? And a good example of that was the concept of deinstitutionalization, right? And back before the time of President Kennedy, many people were put to live in institutions if they were a person with a developmental disability, a person with a mental illness, even physical illnesses. They were put into these almshouses and all lived together, and they were shunned away from society, right? Oof. But in 1964 or thereabouts, President Kennedy, who had a relative with a disability, decided, hey, why don't we try helping these people live in our communities, right? And so that became the dawn of things like group homes for people with developmental disabilities, apartment programs for people with disabilities, and they began to have people come out of institutions and live in the community. A big driving force was an expose done by Geraldo Rivera about an institution called Willowbrook.
Oh, yeah.
And
I
as a
remember
result of his investigation and expose, there was a consent decree called the Willowbrook Consent Decree, which began to really give energy to deinstitutionalization. And so the next thing you know, you would have a group home, right, which was in a community, and you'd have a home where maybe 6 or 8, usually just men or just women, but later became integrated. And those people would live right in the community, and they had live-in supervisors and trainers to teach them skills of daily living that they need for living outside the institution. Okay. However, you had tremendous resistance to this. Okay, because the people in the neighborhood, like, we don't want that in our neighborhood. Well, why wouldn't they want that in their neighborhood? Because of a stereotype. Right? And you say it's not something you can really put your finger on that these stereotyping people are doing, but it's just this kind of a general readiness to believe that the people that are going to live in this group home are going to always be on the verge of doing something destructive.
Whether there's any proof of that or not.
Right. So this is a classic case of a stereotype. Now, this has been overcome to a very large degree because it's been many years since the 1970s when this really started to become a normal thing, right? And there became a whole theory put forward by a social work professor in New York whose name was Wolfensberger, and he put forward normalization theory, which was, let's take people who are devalued, who are acting funny because of their circumstances, and help them to learn what, quote, normal is, okay, so that they become normalized into the society and can have friends and can get a job. And they say when people have friends and a job, generally they're much happier.
Right.
And so this became a whole movement, normalization theory, and then there became this concept they called PASS, Program Analysis of Service Systems. And it became a tool that was used by high-level psychologists like Dr. Kendrick and Dr. Dorsey, and they would go to a given nonprofit usually that is helping people with disabilities or groups of people that have been devalued. Back then, it was the elderly also, people who were elderly, including in nursing homes. And they would use these booklets and analyze the behavior of the staff, the type of decorations in the facility. Were you infantilizing people, right? And so if you have a nursing home with pictures of childlike things as opposed to adult-like things, it's not helping with their normalization. Right?
Now, that's was something that you said was like the 70s is when they started.
Late 70s, early 80s.
So they're really going in to make these changes on a big, large scale to try to help normalize those that have development disabilities. And in a way, it's come from the study of NLP, the neuro-linguistic programming, in a realization that we're, as kind of a whole, we tend to generalize people that don't fit in to make ourselves feel better in order to be superior. So if they had to go through that much in the 70s to change the whole institution, what's something that we can kind of do on a daily basis? You know what I mean? What's a good strategy that we can employ that would help us to deal with, like, say we're getting frustrated by someone who is a person who is older?
Yes.
You know, like what's something
that we could do? There's various things. So people that learn about NLP, and there's books for lay people about NLP. Like there's a book called The Magic of NLP Demystified. There's a book called NLP, The New Science of Achievement. And it explains in varying degrees of detail the inner workings of the human mind and behavior. Okay? And the more you know about it, the more you can stand guard at the door of your mind, okay, and watch yourself, participating in behaviors that are devaluing someone or participating in behaviors that perpetuate stereotypes. Okay? So my advice would be for this ESPN commentator don't use the phrase boomer to describe that.
Right.
It's not because the man was 70 years old that he said that. That was his honest opinion. And by saying that was a boomer-like statement, okay, it's devaluing him, and it's perpetuating the stereotype. So just an understanding of how your own mind works with deletions, distortions, generalizations, and making an agreement with yourself to be more mature and to be more open-minded, right? So this brings us to the whole concept of NVC, or nonviolent communication.
Yes, actually, we did a whole show on this. So if you guys want to get the details on it, it's called How to Use Nonviolent Communication on liveforeveryoungradio.com. But this really applies in this situation, because this will really help to figure out how to open that line of a communication who maybe someone you don't agree with, someone that maybe you think is out of touch. This is probably the key here.
It's perfect. And so there's an acronym that goes with NVC, or nonviolent communication. It's OFNR. So I call it OFNR.
Right.
So OFNR starts with observing without judgment.
Right.
Okay. So most of the time when people are having a conversation or listening, right? Did you get that generalization most of the time?
Yes.
They are listening from their own collection of beliefs. Okay? And in some cases, these are very hard cognitive commitments that they may have created prematurely before really having all of the information.
Okay.
And so when you make a commitment to observe someone else, meaning listening, watching, without judgment, and instead focusing on the F part of the acronym, which is feelings, focusing on the person's feelings, then you are at the beginning of a communication strategy that's going to be more productive, more compassionate, and you yourself will open your mind. They say the most powerful thing in the universe is an open mind.
Yes.
Right? And so you are demonstrating open-mindedness when I'm going to observe with no judgment, no preconceived notions, and I'm going to focus on your feelings. And then as I begin to get a sense of how you're feeling about something, I can say something about that. It seems like you feel very strongly about this. It seems like you're feeling very disappointed with that person based on what you're telling me. It seems like you're feeling very happy and joyful about what just happened, right? Now, when you reflect back that way, instead of having all your own beliefs going on and interrupting and projecting your beliefs onto that person or contradicting them, you go to their feelings, right? Because now what's happened is you've just made a shift in what in NLP they call primary representational systems, which is, am I in my kinesthetic, my feelings? Am I in my visual? I see what you mean. Am I in auditory, right?
Gotcha.
I hear you. Or am I in auditory digital, meaning my engineering mind, right? Okay, and so it's good to shift out of one particular set of commitments and move into the kinesthetic. It's more heart-centered, right? And so now I'm in the kinesthetic by talking about the person's feelings.
Right.
And as they begin to confirm my guess about their feelings,
Or correct it if you're wrong.
right? Modify it, add to it, whatever, right? And then you can move to the next part, which is N is needs.
Right.
So you can say something like, it seems to me that you might need help with this in order to address this feeling that you're having, right? And so this is also very respectful because it's telling the other person, I understand that you might need something, and so I'm affirming that. Now, this is where usually you get feedback back that goes, no, I don't really need that, but I do need this.
Right.
Okay? And so, especially if it's a face-to-face relation that's just between the two people and not a third party, then it leads to the R part, which is a request.
Right.
Right? And a request has to be reasonable.
Reasonable. It was the first thing. You can't give me. I need you to give me $1 million.
Right.
No, that's not reasonable.
It has to be respectful.
Right.
So it's RRR, a respectful, reasonable request.
Just think of a pirate.
Now, the person might come up with the request on their own.
Right. Okay.
Which is related to what they think they need and how that relates to their feelings. Okay. Now, and it might not be. They might not even be able to think of something. So the other person, maybe having more experience with NVC, could say, "It seems to me that if you were to request this of me, I could probably do that type of thing, and it might meet your need and make you feel better." Okay? But guess what? It's a hallucination. It's a guess. Okay?
Of course.
And so now you go right back into observing with no judgment while the person reflects back and responds to your suggested request. And then they're going to modify, come up with a request that's hopefully respectful and reasonable. Okay? And then as the request is received and confirmed, I understand how you feel. Right? And the person believes you because you've been talking about their feelings. Usually when someone says, "I understand how you feel," they go, "You don't know how I feel."
Yeah, bullcrap.
Right? How would you know how I
How
feel?
do you know?
Well, how would I know? Because I just spent time talking to you.
It's called NVC, baby.
Yeah. And so now we can reflect together and I can say, I can meet that request because I understand how you feel. Okay. And if you want to use a little NLP on top of it, you can say, I understand how you feel and I can meet that request. And as a matter of fact, I think that if you were to look ahead a couple of weeks from now or a month from now or even a year from now, what you're going to find is that when I did this thing that you're requesting, that you're going to feel a lot better. Okay?
That's
And
cool.
so this is called future pacing, right? And it's very helpful. It's not manipulative. It's helpful, right? Because it's moving the person into an anticipation of success and it enters the two of you into this morphic field of success and makes the outcome much more predictable.
Morphic field is a very cool way to describe it, but what I can kind of see with the technique and with what we were talking about before with the generalization. Now, the generalization occurs because one person has to be up here and one person has to be down here. But when you use NVC, it actually makes that level because you have then now considered this person's feeling and this person's feeling, then this person's need, and then the response and the request.
Yeah.
The request, the reasonable request is where it can actually be resolved without deleting, distorting, generalizing,
or screaming at each other,
or yelling, or punching, or fighting. Or we don't need that, you know. So, but it's like I think we said this before when we were doing the show about nonviolent communication. This is a tool that you can use to combat the negativity of things like "okay, boomer," of things like you darn kids. You know, let's talk. Well,
so a response other than "okay, boomer" would be from a millennial. Person who's a millennial to a person who's a boomer. If someone said, "You darn kids these days," you could start a conversation with them and say, it seems to me like you're feeling a little bit angry about these darn kids these days. Is that right? You're feeling angry about that?
Well, yeah. I mean, everybody gets a participation trophy, and I mean, they don't even do any work for it, you know. Yeah. And there's some truth to that, you know. You got to call a spade, but that feeling that maybe somebody doesn't deserve something, that's another part of the deleting and the distorting. So it's another layer of an onion you kind of have to peel back and understand why they would feel that way.
Right. But right away, the person, maybe even imperceptibly, who's the boomer, starts to soften a little bit because here's a millennial that wants to talk about his feelings.
Exactly.
And then he could rant and rave, and the millennial could say something like, "Wow, seems like you're disgusted with what's going on these days, and it feels to me like maybe you need some relief from all of this, a break from all of this negativity between the generations."
Yeah.
Right? It's like, you know, and so now you can begin to have this conversation.
It brings you down to the same level.
And now you're a person who's practicing NVC, has knowledge of NLP, right? And is standing guard at the door of your mind so that you don't react back
Right.
without understanding people's feelings, right?
Pretty cool.
And so the last part, Raleigh, before we sign off here, is like this. So I think one of the biggest fallacies and why people are led to these stereotypes and generalizations and devaluing of others so that they can feel good about themselves is that people believe that they can't be good unless someone else is bad, right? Or I can't be part of a group that's good unless that group is bad.
Right.
Okay? And the fact is that, everybody is of equal value, right?
Yes.
All men were created equal, meaning all men and everyone else, all genders, right? And we are all creations of God, right? We all have a spark of God in us, which is animating our beating heart, right? And if we can turn our focus to our own divinity, our own spark of God that we have, and away from comparative observations, we can develop a self-esteem where we are good simply because we are. We're here on earth, and we, as everyone else is, are valuable human beings with worth and dignity, right? And we are here to create happiness, right? To create a happy, joyful life,
Right.
And so an individual, rather than participating in this negativity, can focus instead on creating their own joy, living with a joyful anticipation of the future, as Dr. Dispenza says, right? And focus on creating your own paradise. What exactly would have to happen for me to feel like I was living in paradise, right? And there are many religious teachers, spiritual teachers, that say paradise is where we live, right? Where we are right now, because God only created paradise, okay? And the earth is part of paradise. So within this paradise, we're creating our own special version of it through what we pursue, how we treat people. And as we really imagine our own paradise to create, we then can really begin to feel that, right? And to see it in our mind's eye and then live it out. Live out this set of new forward-looking beliefs that you have, right? And then share it, okay? Here's me, here's Raleigh, here's Bob. Let me share my paradise with you, and you share your paradise with me. Raleigh's paradise is he really loves the Tampa Bay Lightning.
That's right.
And hockey in general.
That's correct.
Okay.
You knew that.
And
you guys
so
knew that too.
That's why it's so fun for me to hear you talk about it.
Cool.
Because it's you sharing a slice of your paradise with me, right? This is your note. Each person gets to play a note for the universe.
Right.
It's an orchestra of beautiful music, God's universe, and we each play one note, and every note is different. And you wouldn't want every note to be the same. It wouldn't be music.
Boring,
It would be
right?
boring. It wouldn't be music. And so whatever note it is that you choose is emanating from the paradise that you've created. And it literally changes the forces that's coming off your body when you are creating from a place of joy and paradise as opposed to a place of grumpiness and comparative observations.
Right. Generalizations.
It literally changes the pulsed electromagnetic forces
Absolutely.
that are coming out from your brain and coming from your heart muscle.
Actually,
right?
we've talked about that on a prior show.
Yeah. And so this is your note, and
Right.
your note has a signature, and it has a very specific wave that can be measured coming from your heart. So you can move away from the stereotypes and devaluing the okay boomer or kids these days, and move into simply focusing on your own joy, your own creation of your own paradise, and share it with the universe as the most beautiful note that you can play at this very moment. And then enjoy the notes from the other people that have created a beautiful note to be shared with everyone else. And you can bask in it, and then you can join your notes together, share them with another person. Right?
That's cool.
So you have gatherings, you have workplaces with people that are working together, you have families, And this is a path forward away from all this extreme negativity that we are experiencing, starting back in early 2020 is when it started to get more heightened and more contentious.
Agreed.
And this is a strategy that was put together by the most famous therapists in the world, Milton Erickson, Marshall Rosenberg, who created NVC, right? Fritz Perls, Doctors Bandler and Grinder, teaching us the whole science. And now with spiritual teachers like Rasha, spiritual teachers like Dr. Dispenza, spiritual teachers that are teaching from different religious standpoints. And we have all this information now in order to move past this temporary time of this whole conflict and move into this new age of Aquarius, right?
Harmony, harmonize the notes,
harmonize together using these tools.
Right.
Right.
Well, man, that was really cool. You think about the way that you say these things when you create a morphic energy.
Morphic field.
A morphic field. There you go.
Right.
So it's got to have some harmony to the notes that each of us plays. And like you said, if we were all the same, it'd be like boring. So let's get past the negative. Let's stop generalizing. Let's listen and observe without judgment.
That's it.
Right?
We can do it.
I know we can.
So that's it for today. Thank you, everyone, for listening to and watching Live Forever Young Radio. We will see you on the next show.
Thanks for listening to Live Forever Young Radio. Check us out at liveforeveryoungradio.com.